Imagine you're walking through a museum late at night. The exhibits are silent, but the artifacts, they're screaming to tell their stories. What if I told you that right now, in this very moment, you're about to discover some of the most bone-chilling legends that have survived thousands of years of human history? And here's the thing, these aren't just campfire stories. These are legends that shaped entire civilizations, caused emperors to tremble, and in some cases, turned out to be terrifyingly real. Before we dive in, I should warn you, what you're about to learn might change the way you look at history forever. And that thing you sometimes hear at night? After this video, you might just figure out what it really is. Let's start with something that might be lurking in your local lake right now. The indigenous people of North America told tales of the underwater panthers, massive feline creatures that lurk beneath the surface of the Great Lakes. These weren't your average lake monsters. The underwater panthers, or mishipishu, were said to be copper-scaled creatures with horns and razor-sharp spines along their backs. But here's where it gets interesting. Archaeologists have found countless copper artifacts in the Great Lakes region, many decorated with images of these creatures. And the really wild part? The indigenous peoples insisted that the underwater panthers guarded vast copper deposits at the bottom of the lakes. Fast forward to modern times, and guess what scientists discovered? The Great Lakes region contains one of the largest deposits of pure copper in the world. How did they know? Let's shift gears to ancient Mesopotamia, where one of the creepiest legends ever recorded was carved into clay tablets over 4,000 years ago. The legend of Lamashtu, a female demon so terrifying that even other demons feared her. Unlike other supernatural creatures, Lamashtu had a very specific taste. She preyed exclusively on pregnant women and newborn babies. The Mesopotamians were so terrified of Lamashtu that they created thousands of protective amulets. Archaeologists are still finding these amulets today, often buried in the foundations of ancient houses or discovered in the graves of women who died in childbirth. But here's the fascinating part. Modern medical historians believe the Lamashtu legend might have been ancient Mesopotamia's way of explaining a very real and terrifying phenomenon, sudden infant death syndrome. The descriptions of Lamashtu's attacks, babies seemingly fine one moment and lifeless the next, mirror the tragic suddenness of SIDS. These ancient people created a demon to explain something we still struggle to fully understand today. In ancient Egypt, there was a legend about the eaters of hearts, demons that would weigh your soul against a feather in the afterlife. If your heart was heavier than the feather, these creatures would devour it, condemning you to eternal oblivion. Now, you might think this was just another scary story to keep people in line. But in 2018, archaeologists made a discovery that sent chills down their spines. In a previously undiscovered tomb in the Valley of the Kings, they found something unprecedented, a sealed jar containing a perfectly preserved human heart, surrounded by protective amulets and covered in hieroglyphs warning about the eaters of hearts. But here's the truly bizarre part. When they analyzed the heart using modern medical techniques, they found evidence of a rare genetic condition that would have made this person's heart significantly lighter than normal. Was this ancient Egyptian trying to cheat the afterlife's weighing ceremony? Let's travel east to ancient Japan, where the legend of the Gashadokuro still keeps people awake at night. Imagine this, you're walking alone at night, and suddenly you hear the sound of grinding teeth above you. You look up, and there it is, a 90-foot-tall skeleton made from the bones of people who died from starvation. Japanese historians have linked these legends to specific periods of famine in Japanese history. During the Great Kane famine of the 1640s, countless reports of Gashadokuro sightings were recorded. But here's something most people don't know. Recent archaeological excavations near ancient Japanese villages have uncovered mass graves dating back to these famine periods. And in these graves, they found something peculiar. The bones show evidence of being cleaned and arranged in specific patterns. Were these ritual burials meant to appease the Gashadokuro? Or was there something even more sinister going on? Speaking of sinister, let me tell you about the Chinese legend of the hungry ghosts. These weren't your typical spooky spirits, they were said to have needle-thin necks, huge bellies, and an endless appetite for human flesh. The ancient Chinese were so terrified of these entities that they created an entire month-long festival dedicated to appeasing them. During this time, They would leave out elaborate feasts and burn paper money to satisfy the ghosts' hunger. But here's where modern science drops a bombshell. Researchers studying ancient Chinese medical texts have found descriptions of symptoms that perfectly match prion diseases, rare but horrifying conditions that quite literally eat holes in the human brain and can cause insatiable hunger. Could these hungry ghosts have been the ancient Chinese's way of explaining these devastating diseases? You've probably heard of the sirens, those mythical creatures whose songs lured sailors to their doom. But what you might not know is that in 2019, marine archaeologists working in the Mediterranean made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Off the coast of a small Greek island, they found an underwater cave system that creates an incredibly unusual acoustic phenomenon. When the waves hit these caves at certain angles, they produce sounds remarkably similar to human singing. Even more intriguing? The cave entrance is surrounded by ancient shipwrecks. Coincidence? I think not. But here's the really wild part. Analysis of these shipwrecks revealed that many of them sank in perfectly calm weather. What could have possessed experienced ancient sailors to steer directly into those rocks? In Norse mythology, there's a creature called the Needhawk, a massive dragon that gnaws at the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree. The Vikings believed that when Needhawk finally succeeds in destroying these roots, it would trigger Ragnarok, the end of the world. For centuries, scholars dismissed this as pure fantasy. That is, until climatologists studying ancient tree rings in Scandinavia made an astonishing discovery. They found evidence of a massive underground fungal network that had been slowly destroying Norse forests for thousands of years. This fungal network spreads in a serpentine pattern and literally feeds on tree roots. Even more mind-bending, the local name for this fungus roughly translates to corpse swallower, eerily similar to the meaning of Needhawk in Old Norse. But wait, it gets better. The Vikings also believed that Needhawk fed on the bodies of the dead, and recent studies have shown that this particular fungus thrives in soil enriched by decomposed organic matter. We all know about the volcano that buried Pompeii, but there's a darker legend that survived, the story of the shadow walkers. Ancient Romans believed these entities would appear in the streets of Pompeii at night, weeks before disaster struck. Witnesses described these figures as human-shaped shadows that walked through walls and left ashen footprints in their wake. The locals thought they were omens of death, but nobody listened. Fast forward to 2021, and during a routine excavation, archaeologists found something that defies explanation. Preserved in the volcanic ash were countless footprints leading directly into solid walls. But here's the kicker: chemical analysis of these footprints showed they contained high levels of volcanic ash. The same type of ash that would later bury the entire city. Modern geologists now believe these shadow walkers might have been caused by early volcanic vents releasing invisible gases, which carried volcanic ash and created the appearance of walking shadows when caught in the moonlight. The Romans were literally seeing death walking their streets, they just didn't know it was volcanic gas. Now, about those London construction workers. In 2019, while digging the foundation for a new parking structure, they uncovered something that sent archaeologists rushing to the site, an ancient Roman temple dedicated to a forgotten goddess called Antinausiticus. According to legend, Antinausiticus could predict the future by showing people their own deaths in dreams. The Romans were so terrified of her that they buried her temples and tried to erase her from history. Here's where it gets bizarre. Among the artifacts found in the temple were hundreds of small lead tablets, each inscribed with detailed descriptions of dreams. When researchers analyzed these dreams, they found something astonishing. Many of the described deaths matched perfectly with known historical events that happened months or even years after the dreams were recorded. Coincidence? Maybe. But even skeptical historians are having trouble explaining this one. Speaking of unexplained phenomena, let's talk about the Aztec legend of the night axe. According to ancient texts, this mysterious sound would echo through the streets of Tenochtitlan at night, sounding like an invisible woodcutter chopping trees. Hearing this sound was considered an omen of impending disaster. The fascinating part? Just months before the Spanish conquest, multiple sources recorded hearing these sounds throughout the city. Modern acoustic scientists studying the layout of ancient Tenochtitlan have discovered that the city's unique architecture, combined with certain weather conditions, can create sound waves that perfectly mimic the sound of chopping wood. Deep in the Yucatan Peninsula, the Maya told stories of Camazotz, a death bat god who could only be defeated by the sound of sacred drums. For centuries, scholars dismissed this as pure mythology. That was until a team of bioacoustics researchers discovered something extraordinary in these ancient cave systems. The natural resonance frequency of the Maya ceremonial drums exactly matches the frequency that disrupts the echolocation of vampire bats. The Maya had literally found a scientific way to repel vampire bats and wrapped it in a legend that would ensure the knowledge was passed down through generations. Talk about ancient life hacks. But here's something even more fascinating. Recent DNA analysis of ancient Maya musical instruments showed traces of bat blood. Were they testing their instruments against real vampire bats? Now, let's hop across the ocean to ancient Ireland, where the legend of the Banshee has taken on a whole new meaning thanks to modern medical science. We all know the Banshee as a wailing spirit who predicts death, but ancient Celtic texts describe something far more specific. They mention that the Banshee's cry was only heard before certain types of deaths, particularly in specific families. Here's where modern science drops a bombshell. Genetic researchers studying Irish family histories have discovered that many of the families traditionally associated with Banshee warnings share a common genetic mutation. This mutation causes a rare condition that produces high-pitched ringing in the ears, a condition that often manifests days before a cardiac event. Were the ancient Irish actually describing an inherited early warning system for heart attacks? The next time you hear ringing in your ears, you might want to check your family history. But perhaps the most shocking legend comes from the ancient Polynesian navigators. They spoke of the night marchers, ghostly warriors who walked across the surface of the ocean, their torches floating above the waves. Seeing these lights meant certain death for sailors, yet these stories were carefully preserved and passed down through generations of Pacific navigators. Modern marine biologists have now identified a bioluminescent algae species that blooms in long, straight lines across the Pacific. These blooms often indicate dangerous underwater currents that could destroy small boats. Those ghostly torches weren't supernatural warriors, they were nature's warning lights, marking deadly ocean currents. The ancient Polynesians had encoded vital sailing safety information in ghost stories. The truly mind-blowing part? These algae blooms are becoming more frequent due to climate change, making these ancient legends more relevant than ever for modern sailors. In West African folklore, there's a legend about the night walkers of Mali, mysterious figures who could travel vast distances through the desert in complete darkness without losing their way. According to the stories, these night walkers could feel the stars beneath their feet, even when clouds covered the sky. For centuries, historians dismissed these tales as pure fantasy. Then, in 2020, geologists studying the Sahara Desert made an extraordinary discovery. Certain strips of sand in ancient Malian trade routes contain unusually high concentrations of magnetite, a naturally magnetic mineral. These magnetic pathways perfectly align with the historical trade routes described in the Night Walker legends. Even more fascinating? These magnetic lines are strong enough to be felt through the soles of feet. The ancient Malians had discovered a natural magnetic navigation system centuries before the invention of the compass. They weren't following magical paths, they were following the Earth's magnetic field. Speaking of pathways, let's talk about ancient Persia and the legend of the dream roads. Persian manuscripts tell of secret routes that only appear in dreams, leading travelers to hidden oases in the desert. Modern archaeology has revealed something incredible about these supposedly imaginary routes. Using satellite imaging, researchers have discovered ancient underground water channels, called quanets, that create unique temperature patterns on the surface. These temperature differences are most noticeable at dawn when desert travelers would be most likely to experience waking dreams due to dehydration and fatigue. The dream roads weren't supernatural pathways, they were heat signatures from hidden water sources. But here's the truly remarkable part. These ancient water systems were built with such precise engineering that many of them still function today, thousands of years later. The Persians didn't just build water systems, they created a complex network of survival information encoded in folklore. Every ghost story was a map. Every dream vision was a survival guide. And let's not forget about the Persian legend of the singing sands. Ancient texts describe certain desert dunes that would produce haunting music at night, which they believed were the voices of buried cities. Modern science has shown that certain sand dunes can indeed produce sounds due to the movement of sand particles, but here's the fascinating twist: these singing dunes often indicate the presence of ancient buried structures beneath the sand. Remember when I promised to tell you about the most shocking legend of all? Well, here it is, and trust me, this one's going to change the way you think about ancient stories forever. In the mountains of Tibet, there's a legend about the Oracle Bones, sacred caves where the walls themselves were said to predict the future. Monks would meditate in these caves and report seeing visions of natural disasters months before they occurred. For centuries, this was dismissed as religious mythology. That changed in 2022 when geologists discovered something extraordinary about these cave systems. The caves sit directly on a complex network of fault lines. The crystalline structures in the cave walls actually change color slightly under tectonic stress, weeks or months before an earthquake. The monks weren't having supernatural visions. They were observing subtle geological warning signs that modern science is only now beginning to understand. But here's the mind-blowing part. When researchers analyzed ancient Tibetan manuscripts, they found detailed color charts describing these changes. Our ancestors weren't just telling stories, they were creating early warning systems. This brings us to a profound question: how many other ancient legends are actually scientific observations in disguise? How much forgotten knowledge is hidden in the stories we dismiss as mere superstition? Think about it. We've seen how the underwater Panthers led us to copper deposits, how Japanese skeleton giants marked famine graves, how ghostly Viking dragons warned of forest diseases, and how Aztec phantom sounds predicted disaster. These weren't just stories to frighten children around campfires. They were sophisticated encoding systems, preserving vital information about the natural world across generations. The truly fascinating part? We're still discovering new meanings in these ancient legends. Every year, advances in technology allow us to understand these stories in ways our ancestors could never have imagined. So the next time you hear an old legend or ghost story, pay attention. That creepy tale might not just be entertainment, it could be an ancient message, waiting centuries to be understood. Because here's the real truth that will keep you up at night: our ancestors were far more sophisticated than we give them credit for. They weren't just surviving in their world, they were studying it, understanding it, and finding ingenious ways to pass that knowledge down through time. And who knows? Maybe centuries from now, future archaeologists will look back at our own stories and legends, discovering scientific truths we didn't even know we were telling. After all, if there's one thing these ancient legends teach us, it's that sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that turn out to be true.